The man I loved watched me die, and he checked his watch. While I was suffocating in that delivery room, while our baby's heart rate was dropping, my husband stood at the door with his mistress and said 5 words that will haunt me forever. Make it quick. I have a dinner reservation at 8. For 8 years, I thought I knew Preston Caldwell, the charming CEO, the devoted husband, the man who promised to love me until death do us part. I just never realized he meant my death. But here's the thing about monsters. They always underestimate their prey. Preston saw a quiet housewife who had given up her career for him. He saw someone weak, someone disposable, someone worth $50 million in life insurance. What he did not see was the forensic accountant who could trace every dirty dollar he ever hid. And he definitely did not see my father coming. Because the humble gardener who raised me, the simple man in flannel shirts and muddy boots that Preston always looked down on, he is worth $42 billion, and he was about to burn my husband's entire world to the ground. This is my story. And if you have ever trusted someone who betrayed you, if you have ever felt trapped in a life you did not choose, if you have ever wondered whether justice really exists in this world, then stay until the end. Because sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who lose everything. Before we begin, I want you to know something important. This story is not just about revenge. It is about reclaiming your power when someone tries to take everything from you. It is about the strength that comes from family, the courage it takes to ask for help, and the truth that the strongest things in life grow from the ground up. If you are going through something difficult right now, if you feel trapped or alone or powerless, I hope this story reminds you that your situation is not permanent. Help exists. And sometimes, the people who seem the weakest are the ones with the greatest strength hidden inside. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The man I loved watched me die, and he checked his watch. Those words would haunt Sophie Mercer Caldwell for the rest of her life. But in that moment, gasping for air in the delivery room of St. Michael's Hospital, she could only focus on one thing: survival. The oxygen had stopped flowing. Her lungs burned. Through blurred vision, she could see her husband Preston standing at the door, his Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights. Next to him stood Maggie Vance, his mistress, his CFO, the woman who had just turned off Sophie's oxygen valve. Preston did not move to help her. He simply checked his watch as if calculating how long it would take for her to die. The machines around Sophie screamed their warnings. The fetal heart monitor spiked dangerously. Her baby, her little girl, was dying inside her, and her husband was timing it. Sophie's vision tunneled. Black spots exploded across her sight. She could not scream. She could not breathe. She could only watch as the two people who had conspired to kill her walked calmly out of the room, closing the door behind them. With her last ounce of strength, Sophie knocked a metal tray off the bedside table. It crashed to the floor. Then another, and another. The door burst open. A nurse rushed in. Code blue, room 402. The oxygen is off. Then darkness claimed her. 3 weeks earlier, Sophie had been the perfect CEO's wife. The charity gala at the Caldwell penthouse was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 200 of Manhattan's most influential people. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Sophie moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her 8-month pregnant belly draped in a custom Valentino gown. She smiled at donors, thanked volunteers, and deflected compliments about her husband with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Preston Caldwell worked the room like a politician running for office. At 42, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying, tall, silver-templed, with a smile that could charm millions out of investors and voters alike. The media called him a self-made success story, a former foster kid who had built a tech empire from nothing. Sophie knew a different version of that story, but she had learned long ago to keep her doubts to herself. Tonight, as always, Maggie Vance shadowed Preston like a second skin. As CFO of Caldwell and Company, Maggie had every reason to be at his side. She was brilliant, Ivy League educated, and ruthlessly ambitious. She was also, Sophie suspected, sleeping with Sophie's husband. Sophie watched Preston's hand brush against the small of Maggie's back. Too familiar, too intimate, a touch that said more than any words could. She looked away and told herself she was imagining things. A waiter approached Sophie near the bar, but something about him seemed off. His jacket did not quite fit. His eyes were too alert. "Excuse me, Mrs. Caldwell," he said quietly. "You have been served." He pressed an envelope into her hand and disappeared into the crowd before Sophie could respond. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were divorce papers, filed by Preston, dated 3 months ago, never finalized. The room seemed to spin around her. 3 months. He had been planning to leave her for 3 months, and she had not known. She had smiled at him across the breakfast table, slept beside him every night, and never suspected a thing. Sophie tucked the envelope into her purse with shaking hands. She would not make a scene. She would not give him the satisfaction. But something inside her had shifted, cracked like ice over dark water. Her phone buzzed. A text message preview appeared on the screen from a contact she had programmed to auto-block 2 years ago. "Dad, I know I am the last person you want to hear from, but please, something is wrong. Call me." Sophie deleted the message without reading it fully. Her father, William Mercer, was a gardener who lived in a modest farmhouse upstate, a simple man in flannel shirts and muddy boots who had never understood her ambitions, her world, her husband. He had warned her about Preston before the wedding. She had accused him of being controlling, of not trusting her judgment. She had not spoken to him in 3 years. Whatever warning her father thought he had, it was too late now. She was pregnant, married, and trapped in a life she no longer recognized. Later that night, Sophie lay awake in the darkness of the master bedroom, waiting for her husband to come home. The penthouse was silent. The gala had ended at midnight. The caterers had cleaned up and left. The donations had been counted and celebrated. Sophie had smiled until her face ached, played the perfect hostess until every last guest had departed. Now it was 3 in the morning, and Preston's side of the bed was still empty. She heard the front door open, footsteps in the hallway. The bedroom door swung open, and Preston walked in, already loosening his tie. "Where were you?" Sophie asked, her voice flat. Preston did not look at her as he undressed. "Emergency board call." "Asian markets. You know how it is. The gala ended at midnight. That is 3 hours unaccounted for." Preston paused. He turned, and for a moment, Sophie saw something flicker in his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. Then his charming smile slid into place, smooth as silk. "Are you auditing me now, Sophie?" He walked over to the bed and kissed her forehead. The gesture felt cold, transactional. "Get some rest," he said. "You are very pregnant. You are probably just hormonal." He said the word hormonal, the way someone might say hysterical, dismissive, condescending, a word designed to make her doubt her own perceptions. Sophie said nothing, but she did not sleep that night. The next morning, Sophie was supposed to be at her prenatal appointment. Instead, she found herself parked outside Maggie Vance's apartment building in the Upper West Side. She told herself she just needed to know. She needed proof, one way or another. She could not spend the rest of her marriage wondering, suspecting, driving herself crazy with doubt. She waited for 2 hours, then Preston's Tesla pulled up to the curb. He got out, checked his phone, and walked into the building without looking around. Sophie sat frozen in her car. Part of her had known, had always known, really, but there was a difference between suspecting and seeing, a difference between doubt and certainty. She watched the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. 30 minutes, 45, an hour. He was not dropping off quarterly reports. Sophie drove away before he came out. She did not want him to see her, did not want to confront him on the street, in public, with her belly swollen and her heart breaking. That night, she waited for him in the living room of the penthouse. Preston walked in at 7, looking relaxed and well-rested. He smiled when he saw her, that same charming smile that had won her over 8 years ago. "Sophie," he said, "I thought you would be lying down. How are you feeling?" "I saw you at Maggie's today," Sophie said. Her voice was calm, controlled. The forensic accountant in her was gathering evidence, not making accusations. Preston's smile did not waver. "I was dropping off quarterly reports. You know how busy she is. For 2 hours? Sophie." His tone shifted, just slightly. "You are 8 months pregnant. You are emotional. I need you to trust me. I found the divorce papers, Preston, the ones you filed 3 months ago." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Sophie saw Preston's mask slip. His eyes hardened, his jaw tightened. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. "I filed those during a rough patch," he said smoothly. "I never went through with it, because I love you. Then tear them up, right now, in front of me." Preston paused, a long pause, the kind of pause that told Sophie everything she needed to know. "The papers are at my lawyer's office," he said finally. "I will have them destroyed tomorrow." He was lying. She knew he was lying, but she nodded anyway. "Okay," she said. She was not agreeing. She was buying time, because Sophie Mercer Caldwell had not always been a CEO's wife. Before Preston, before the penthouse and the charity galas and the designer gowns, she had been a forensic accountant, one of the best in the city. She had made her career finding the money that powerful men tried to hide. Preston had asked her to give up that career when they married. He said she did not need to work, that he would take care of everything. And Sophie, young and in love and desperate to believe in happily ever after, had agreed. But old skills never really die. They just wait for the right moment to resurface. And Sophie had a feeling that moment was coming very soon. 3 days after confronting Preston about the divorce papers, Sophie put her old skills to use. She waited until he left for a business dinner, then drove to the Caldwell and Company headquarters on Park Avenue. The building was mostly empty at 9 in the evening, just a few security guards and cleaning crews making their rounds. Sophie walked through the lobby with confidence. She had been coming to this building for 8 years. The security guards knew her face, her name, her husband. They smiled and waved her through without a second glance. "Good evening, Mrs. Caldwell. Working late?" "Just picking up some files for Preston," Sophie lied smoothly. "You know how he forgets things." The elevator took her to the executive floor. The hallway was dark and silent. Sophie's heart pounded as she approached Preston's corner office. She punched in the security code. The same code Preston had used for years, the one he had never bothered to change because he did not think his wife would ever have a reason to snoop. The door clicked open. Preston's office was immaculate. Leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than most people's cars. Sophie moved quickly, systematically, the way she had been trained. She checked the obvious places first. Desk drawers, filing cabinets, the safe, behind the abstract painting. Nothing. Then she tried the locked drawer at the bottom of his desk, the one with the combination lock that Preston thought no one knew about. Sophie tried Maggie's birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside, she found three things that changed everything. The first was a life insurance policy, $50 million, taken out on Sophie 2 years ago. Beneficiary, Preston James Caldwell, $50 million. That was how much her life was worth to him. The second was a stack of medical records, records Sophie had never authorized, documenting a history of depression and suicidal ideation that she had never experienced. The psychiatrist's signature at the bottom was unfamiliar, but Sophie recognized the handwriting. Someone had forged these documents. Someone had created a paper trail that would make Sophie look unstable, unreliable, dangerous. The third was a burner phone. Cheap, prepaid, the kind of phone you bought with cash if you did not want anyone to trace your calls. Sophie powered it on. There were dozens of text messages, all between Preston and Maggie. The most recent exchange made her blood run cold. Preston, after the baby is born, give it 6 months. Postpartum depression is very common. Maggie, and if she does not cooperate? Preston, accidents happen to new mothers. Sophie read the words 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Her hands were shaking so badly that she almost dropped the phone. They were planning to kill her. Her husband and his mistress were planning to murder her and make it look like suicide. The fake medical records, the life insurance policy, the casual discussion of accidents, it was all there, spelled out in black and white. Sophie took photos of everything. The insurance policy, the medical records, the text messages. She forwarded the photos to her personal email, then deleted the evidence of the forwarding from the burner phone. She was putting everything back in the drawer when she felt it. A sudden cramp, low in her abdomen, then another, stronger this time. No, Sophie whispered. Not now. Please, not now. But her body had other plans. Her water broke right there, on the floor of Preston's office, 3 weeks before her due date. Sophie grabbed her phone and called 911. Her voice was remarkably steady, considering that she was in labor and had just discovered that her husband was planning to kill her. This is Sophie Caldwell. I am at the Caldwell and Company building on Park Avenue. I am 8 months pregnant and I am in labor. Please send an ambulance. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. Sophie hung up and tried to breathe through the contractions. She knew where the ambulance would take her. St. Michael's Hospital. The hospital that Preston had funded for the past decade, where he sat on the board of directors, where everyone from the chief of medicine to the janitors knew his name and his money. The hospital where Preston could make anything happen. Sophie tried to think of alternatives. Other hospitals, taxicabs, friends who could pick her up and take her somewhere safe. But the contractions were coming faster now, and she could barely stand, let alone plan an escape route. The paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes. They loaded Sophie onto a stretcher and wheeled her out of the building, past the concerned security guards and the gathering crowd of onlookers. St. Michael's, one of the paramedics said. You will be there in no time, Mrs. Caldwell. Sophie closed her eyes and prayed. The VIP delivery suite at St. Michael's Hospital was luxurious by any standard. Private room, expensive furniture, a view of Central Park. The kind of room that wealthy donors paid extra for. The kind that came with personal attention from the hospital's best doctors. Sophie hated every inch of it. She was alone now, the paramedics having transferred her care to the hospital staff. A nurse had checked her vitals and told her that someone would be on shortly to assess how far along she was. Then the nurse had left, and Sophie had been sitting in terrified solitude ever since, She tried to call her father. 3 years of silence, 3 years of stubborn pride, and now she was desperate enough to reach out to the one person who had tried to warn her. The call went to voicemail. Dad, it is Sophie. I am at St. Michael's Hospital. I am in labor, and I think I am in trouble. Please call me back. Please. She hung up and stared at her phone, willing it to ring. It did not. The door opened. Sophie looked up, hoping to see a doctor, a nurse, anyone who could help her. Instead, she saw Preston. And behind him, Maggie Vance. Preston? Sophie breathed. Thank God. I need to tell you something. But the words died in her throat as she registered the expressions on their faces. Preston looked calm, almost serene. Maggie looked excited, eager, like a predator who had cornered its prey. What is she doing here? Sophie demanded. Preston walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. He did not answer. Maggie closed the door behind her. The soft click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. The staff is prepping for delivery, Preston said, his back still turned. They will be back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Sophie's mind raced. 10 minutes alone with the two people who wanted her dead. Preston, look at me, Sophie pleaded, please. He did not turn around. Maggie approached the bed, carrying a bouquet of flowers that she set down next to the oxygen equipment. Her smile was cold, triumphant. You know, Maggie said softly, I never understood what he saw in you. You are so ordinary. A contraction hit, strong enough to make Sophie cry out. When she opened her eyes, gasping for breath, she saw Maggie's hand on the oxygen valve. No, Sophie begged. No, please. Complications during childbirth are very common, Maggie said, her voice almost conversational, especially with women who have documented mental health issues. She looked at Preston. He finally turned around. For one terrible moment, Sophie met her husband's eyes. The man she had loved, the father of her child, the man she had built a life with for 8 years. Preston checked his Rolex. Make it quick, he said. I have a dinner reservation at 8. Maggie turned the valve. The hiss of oxygen stopped. Sophie could not breathe, could not scream. The room started to spin around her as her lungs burned for air. The fetal heart monitor began to spike, filling the room with frantic beeping. Let us go, Preston said. Preston. The nurses will find her in 5 minutes. By then, well. He shrugged, as if the death of his wife, an unborn child, was nothing more than an inconvenience. They walked out together. Arm in arm, the door clicked shut behind them. Sophie was alone, suffocating, her baby dying inside her. She reached for the panic button, but it had fallen behind the bed. She could not reach it. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Black spots exploded across her vision. Her chest burned. Her baby's heart rate was dropping, the monitors beeping becoming more erratic by the second. With her last ounce of strength, Sophie knocked a metal tray off the bedside table. It crashed to the floor, loud enough to be heard in the hallway. She knocked another, then another. The door burst open. A nurse rushed in, her eyes widening in horror as she took in the scene. Code Blue, the nurse screamed. I need help in 402. The oxygen is off. Sophie's last conscious thought was a prayer. Please let my baby survive. Please let my baby live. Then everything went black. Sophie woke to the sound of machines beeping. For a long moment, she did not know where she was. The room was bright, white, sterile. Tubes and wires connected her body to monitors that blinked and hummed with quiet urgency. Then she remembered. The oxygen valve. Preston's Rolex. Maggie's cold smile. Her baby. Sophie tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body and she collapsed back against the pillows. Her throat was raw. Her chest ached. And every breath felt like swallowing glass. A nurse appeared at her bedside, gentle hands pressing her back down. "Easy, Mrs. Caldwell. You need to rest. My baby," Sophie croaked. "Where is my baby?" It was not a question. It was a demand, a prayer, a desperate plea, all wrapped into 3 words. "She is okay," the nurse said. And Sophie felt tears streaming down her cheeks before she even registered that she was crying. "She is in the NICU. You both almost died, but she is a fighter, just like her mama." Sophie sobbed with relief. Her daughter was alive. After everything, her daughter was alive. "Your husband has been here all night," the nurse continued, her voice warm with admiration. "He is so worried about you. Such a devoted man." Sophie's tears turned cold. Her blood ran like ice through her veins. Preston. Preston had been here all night, playing the concerned husband, pretending that he had not tried to murder her and their child just hours ago. "Where is he?" Sophie asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just outside. He wanted to give you some time to rest before coming in. I will let him know you are awake." The nurse left before Sophie could protest. A moment later, the door opened, and Preston walked in. He looked perfect as always. His suit was freshly pressed, his hair immaculately styled. He had probably gone home to shower and change while Sophie was unconscious, fighting for her life. He approached the bed with careful steps, his face arranged in an expression of deep concern. "You scared me, Sophie," he said softly. "You tried to kill me." The words came out before Sophie could stop them. Raw, accusatory, true. Preston's expression did not change. He sat down in the chair beside her bed and took her hand in his. His grip was firm, almost painful. "The doctor said you might have some confusion," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "Memory issues from the oxygen deprivation. It is very common with these kinds of complications. I saw you. I saw Maggie turn the valve." Preston squeezed her hand, just a little too hard. His eyes were cold, calculating, completely at odds with his sympathetic tone. "Sophie, listen to me carefully. You are going to recover. You are going to come home. You are going to be a good mother to our daughter. And you are never going to repeat these delusions again. Or what? Or I will have you committed." Preston's voice was still soft, still reasonable, but there was steel underneath. "And I will raise our daughter to believe that her mother abandoned her." Sophie stared at him. This man she had loved. This man she had trusted. This man who had just threatened to take away everything she had left. Preston kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt more like a brand than a blessing. "Rest now," he said. "I will be back tomorrow." He left without looking back. Sophie stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was alive. Her daughter was alive. But they were both trapped. 4 days later, Sophie checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice. She was still weak, still recovering, but she could not wait any longer. She had to act. The police station was only 10 blocks from St. Michael's. Sophie took a taxi because she was not strong enough to walk that far. The driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why a woman who looked like she had just escaped from a hospital was so determined to get to a precinct. Sophie did not explain. She paid him when they arrived and walked into the station on unsteady legs. The waiting area was crowded and chaotic. Phones ringing, people arguing, officers moving between desks with purpose. Sophie approached the front counter and asked to speak to someone about attempted murder. The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow but directed her to a detective on the second floor. Detective Carmen Reyes was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to Sophie's story without interrupting, taking notes in a battered notebook. Sophie told her everything: the affair, the insurance policy, the burner phone messages, the oxygen valve. Preston's calm demeanor as he watched his wife suffocate. When she finished, Detective Reyes set down her pen and looked at Sophie with an expression that was hard to read. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said slowly, Your husband is one of our biggest donors. He has contributed over $2 million to the Police Foundation over the past decade. I have to be very careful here. Sophie's heart sank. So, you are not going to investigate? I did not say that. The detective leaned forward, her voice dropping. But I need evidence, not just your testimony. You are a woman who was recently under extreme physical stress, who experienced oxygen deprivation, who has documented mental health issues. That is how Preston's lawyers will paint this. Those mental health records are fake, Sophie protested. I never saw that psychiatrist. I never had those symptoms. I believe you. But believing is not the same as proving. But do you have the photos you took of the insurance policy and the text messages? Sophie pulled out her phone and showed the detective the images. Detective Reyes studied them carefully, her frown deepening. These are helpful, she admitted. But a good lawyer could argue they are fabricated. Digital evidence is easy to manipulate. What about the hospital cameras? They should have captured your husband and Miss Vance entering and leaving your room. Sophie felt a spark of hope. Check them. Check the footage. Detective Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. We already did. The footage from that hallway is corrupted. 4 hours missing, right around the time of your delivery. No. Sophie's voice cracked. No, that is not possible. Mrs. Caldwell, I am not saying I do not believe you. I am saying that someone with a lot of power is covering their tracks. Someone who knows how to manipulate evidence and silence witnesses. If you want justice, I need more. Something irrefutable. Something that cannot be explained away or deleted. Sophie left the police station feeling more hopeless than ever. She had evidence, but not enough. She had the truth, but no way to prove it. When she got home that night, Preston was waiting for her. So was his lawyer, Mrs. Caldwell. The lawyer was a thin man with expensive glasses and a condescending smile. Your husband is concerned about your mental health. He is prepared to seek a psychiatric evaluation. I am not crazy, Sophie said flatly. The lawyer spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. You left the hospital against medical advice. You went to the police with unfounded accusations. Your husband has documented concerns dating back months. He gestured to a folder on the coffee table. Sophie recognized the fake medical records from Preston's desk. Sophie, I just want you to get help. Preston's voice was warm, caring, completely false. For your sake. For our daughter's sake. And if I refuse, then Mr. Caldwell will have no choice but to pursue emergency custody of your daughter. The lawyer's smile widened. For her safety, of course, Sophie felt the walls closing in around her. If she fought, she would lose her daughter. If she stayed silent, she might not survive. She looked at Preston, searching for some trace of the man she had married, some hint of conscience or compassion. She found nothing. I will think about it, she whispered. That night, Sophie locked herself in the bathroom and sat on the cold tile floor. Her phone was in her hands, open to her blocked contacts. There was one name she had not looked at in 3 years, one person she had sworn she would never speak to again. Dad, William Mercer, her father, the humble gardener who had raised her alone after her mother died, the simple man who had warned her about Preston before the wedding. You are just a gardener, she had screamed at him. What do you know about business? I know a con man when I see one, he had replied calmly, and I know more than you think. Sophie had not believed him. She had been young and in love and convinced that she knew better than her working-class father. She had cut him out of her life completely, refused his calls, blocked his number, ignored his attempts to reach out. Now she was 34 years old, trapped in a marriage with a man who wanted her dead, and her father was the only person in the world who might be able to help her. She unblocked his number. Her fingers trembled as she typed out a message. You were right about him. I need help. Please. She stared at the words for a long moment. Then she pressed send. The response came immediately. 3 dots appeared, then a message. Tell me where you are. I am coming. Sophie's father had been waiting. For 3 years he had been waiting. The diner was small and anonymous. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and nobody remembered faces. Sophie sat in a corner booth, hidden behind sunglasses and a hoodie she had borrowed from the housekeeper. She had told Preston she was going to a follow-up appointment with her obstetrician. She had 30 minutes, maybe 45, before he started to get suspicious. Through the window, she watched a muddy pickup truck pull into the parking lot. It was at least 15 years old, dented in several places, with a layer of dirt that suggested regular trips down country roads. A man climbed out. He was in his late 60s, with weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of decades of physical labor. He wore a flannel shirt, worn jeans, and work boots caked with dried mud. William Mercer. Bill to everyone who knew him. Just a gardener from upstate New York. Sophie's father. He walked into the diner without looking around, as if he had known exactly where he would be sitting. He slid into the booth across from her without any greeting, without any small talk, without any of the emotional reunion that Sophie had half expected. He just looked at her. Really looked, the way he used to, when she was a child and had done something she was not supposed to. Tell me everything, he said. So Sophie did. She told him about the affair, about the divorce papers filed in secret. She told him about the life insurance policy and the fake medical records. She told him about the burner phone messages and the oxygen valve. She told him about the police detective who believed her but could not help her, about the lawyer who had threatened to take her daughter, about the husband who smiled at her across the breakfast table while planning her murder. Bill listened without interrupting. His expression did not change throughout the entire story. When Sophie finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Do you have proof? He asked finally. Some. Sophie pulled out her phone and showed him the photos she had taken. Screenshots of texts. But his lawyer will say they are fabricated. The hospital footage is gone. It is my word against his. Bill studied the images carefully. His weathered face, impossible to read. Not for long, he said. Sophie's heart sank a little. She loved her father, but she knew his limitations. He was a gardener who lived in a modest farmhouse. He drove a pickup truck that was older than some of her designer handbags. He had never had the money or the connections to fight someone like Preston Caldwell. Dad, no offense, but you cannot help me. She tried to keep her voice gentle. You do not have resources. He has lawyers. He has the police. He has everyone, so Bill looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his eyes, something Sophie did not recognize. Sophie, he said slowly, there is something I never told you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple, elegant, expensive paper. Sophie took it and read the words printed in understated gold lettering. William R. Mercer. Chairman, Mercer Holdings. She stared at the card, then she stared at her father. I do not understand, she said. Bill leaned back in his seat. When I started my landscaping business 40 years ago, I was good at one thing, reading people. I could tell which clients would pay and which would stiff me. I could spot a liar from 50 feet away. Sophie waited, barely breathing. That skill translated to investments, Bill continued. I started small, a few thousand here and there, companies I believed in, then real estate, then acquisitions. One thing led to another. Dad, Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. What are you saying? I am saying that I am worth $42 billion, Sophie. I have been hiding it because I wanted you to build character, to earn things, to not be one of those trust fund kids who peaked at 25. The words did not make sense, could not make sense. Her father was a gardener. He lived in a farmhouse. He drove a truck that was held together with duct tape and prayers. But he was holding a business card that said Chairman. His eyes held a confidence she had never noticed before. And now that she thought about it, there had always been things that did not quite add up. The way he never worried about money, the occasional trips overseas that he dismissed as landscaping conferences, the mysterious phone calls he took in private. $42 billion. Her father was a billionaire. And I am saying, Bill continued, his voice dropping into something cold and hard, that your husband just tried to kill my daughter and my granddaughter, and I am going to destroy him. Sophie's mind was reeling. Why? Why did you never tell me? Because you needed to find your own way, make your own choices. I watched too many rich kids destroy themselves with money they did not earn. I did not want that for you. But when I married Preston, when you warned me about him, why did you not stop me? Because you are not my property, Bill said simply. You are my daughter. You had to make your own choice, even if it was the wrong one. A beat of silence, then, but you made your choice. Now he is going to face mine. Sophie sat back, trying to process everything she had just learned. Her father was not a simple gardener. He was one of the wealthiest men in America, and now he was going to use that wealth to destroy the man who had tried to kill her. How? She asked finally. How are you going to do this? Bill's smile was thin and cold, the smile of a man who had spent decades building an empire and crushing his competitors. Leave that to me, he said. For now I need you to go home, act normal. Do not let Preston suspect anything has changed. He will know something is wrong. He is paranoid. Then give him something else to focus on. Tell him you have decided to see a psychiatrist. Tell him you are willing to work on your marriage. Make him think he has won. Sophie felt sick at the thought, pretending to reconcile with the man who had tried to murder her, playing the good wife while plotting his downfall. But she understood the logic. Preston was at his most dangerous when he felt threatened. If she could make him relax, let his guard down, it would give her father time to put his plan into motion. Okay, she said, I will do it, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Do not let him take my daughter. No matter what happens, do not let him take hope. Bill reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. His grip was strong and sure, nothing like the frail gardener she had always imagined him to be. I promise, he said. No one is going to take that little girl from you. Not him, not anyone. For the first time since waking up in that hospital room, Sophie felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The next few weeks were the hardest of Sophie's life. She went home and played the part of the reformed wife. She agreed to see a psychiatrist, one that Preston recommended, and dutifully attended her sessions without revealing anything about what had really happened. She smiled at Preston across the dinner table and pretended that she did not know he was a monster. Meanwhile, Bill was working behind the scenes. Sophie did not know the details. Her father had told her that it was safer that way, that the less she knew, the less Preston could find out if he got suspicious. But every few days, she would receive a brief text message from an unknown number. Progress. Stay strong. She held on to those words like a lifeline. 3 weeks after their meeting at the diner, everything started to fall apart. It began with David Morrison. David was a financial analyst who had worked at Caldwell and Company for 5 years. He was brilliant with numbers, detail-oriented to the point of obsession, and had recently started noticing some irregularities in the company's books. He had reached out to Sophie 6 months ago, before everything went wrong. Quietly, cautiously, through a mutual friend. He said he had found some things that did not add up. Revenue numbers that were inflated. Debt that was hidden in subsidiary companies. The kind of accounting tricks that could land executives in prison if anyone ever looked too closely. Sophie had dismissed him at the time. She had not wanted to believe that her husband was capable of fraud on top of everything else. Now she knew better. Bill's team had reached out to David. They wanted him to testify, to provide documentation, to help build a case against Preston that would hold up in court. David agreed to meet with them. He was scheduled to come to Bill's offices on a Tuesday afternoon. He never showed up. The news broke that evening. Tech analyst dies in single car accident. David Morrison's car had gone off a bridge on his way home from work. No witnesses, no explanation for why a careful, methodical man would suddenly lose control of his vehicle. Sophie saw Preston at dinner that night. He was smiling, relaxed, pouring himself a glass of expensive wine like he did not have a care in the world. She had never hated anyone more in her entire life. David was just the beginning. 2 days after his death, Bill arranged for Sophie to escape. A private jet was waiting at a small airfield in New Jersey. New identities had been created for Sophie and Hope. By morning, they would be in a country with no extradition treaty, safe from Preston's reach forever. Sophie packed a small bag and picked up her daughter from the nursery. Hope was 3 months old now, a perfect little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's dark hair. She had no idea that her world was about to change forever. They made it to the airport without incident. Sophie was starting to breathe easier when a TSA agent approached them at the security checkpoint. "Ma'am." The agent's face was apologetic but firm. "There is an Amber Alert on this child. We need to hold you until police arrive." "No." Sophie's blood ran cold. "No, you do not understand. I am her mother. I am trying to protect her." But it was too late. Preston had reported Hope kidnapped. Sophie was arrested on the spot, handcuffed in front of dozens of horrified travelers, while her daughter was taken from her arms. She spent 48 hours in a holding cell before the charges were dropped. Preston's lawyer argued that it had all been a misunderstanding, that Sophie was suffering from postpartum psychosis and had not been thinking clearly. Hope was returned to her father. Sophie was released with a warning and a suggestion that she seek psychiatric help. The final blow came 1 week later in family court. Preston filed for emergency sole custody, citing Sophie's arrest, her documented mental health issues, and her obvious instability. He presented himself as the concerned husband who only wanted what was best for his daughter. Judge Harold Whitmore listened to both sides. Then he granted Preston temporary custody. Sophie was allowed supervised visitation only, 2 hours a week, with a court-appointed observer present at all times. She walked out of that courtroom feeling like a ghost. Her daughter was gone. Her freedom was gone. Everything she had ever cared about had been taken from her by the man she had trusted most in the world. That night, she called her father. "He took her," Sophie said. Her voice was dead, hollow. "He took my baby." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Bill spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. The voice of a man who had faced setbacks before and refused to be broken by them. "Not everything," he said. "He has not taken me." The headquarters of Mercer Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Sophie had never been here before. She had never even known this place existed. But now, she stood in her father's private office, surrounded by the trappings of a fortune she had never suspected. The view from the 60th floor was breathtaking. All of Manhattan spread out below, glittering in the evening light. From up here, Sophie could see Central Park, the Hudson River, even the distant spires of the Caldwell and Company building where her nightmare had begun. Bill stood At the window, his flannel shirt replaced by a custom suit that somehow looked wrong on him, like a costume, like armor he wore only when necessary. "This is the war room," he said without turning around. "I built this company from nothing, fought off hostile takeovers, survived market crashes, crushed competitors who thought they could outmaneuver me. I have never lost a battle that mattered." He turned to face her, and this one matters more than any of them. Behind him, a conference table stretched the length of the room. Seated around it were a dozen people Sophie did not recognize, men and women in expensive suits, their faces as sharp with intelligence and purpose. Bill made the introductions. Forensic accountants, former FBI investigators, crisis management specialists, a retired federal prosecutor who had put more white-collar criminals behind bars than anyone in the history of the Southern District of New York. "This is my team," Bill said. "The best in the world at what they do, and as of today, their only job is to destroy Preston Caldwell." Sophie looked around the table, feeling overwhelmed. A month ago, she had been alone, trapped, convinced that her husband was going to get away with everything. Now she had an army at her back. "How?" she asked. "How are we going to do this?" Bill gestured to a woman at the end of the table. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of face and that suggested she had seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. "Catherine," he said, "walk us through the plan." Catherine stood and pressed a button on a remote. A massive screen on the wall came to life, displaying a complex diagram with Preston's photo at the center. "We are going to hit him on 5 fronts," Catherine said. "Financial, legal, reputational, social, and personal. By the time we are done, Preston Caldwell will not have a friend, a dollar, or a shred of credibility left to his name." "Start with financial," Bill said. Catherine nodded and clicked to a new slide. This one was covered in numbers, charts, and corporate logos. "Caldwell and Company is a house of cards," she said. "We have been digging into their books for 2 weeks, and what we have found is stunning. Hidden debt, fake revenue, shell companies designed to make the balance sheet look healthier than it is. Preston's company is not just in trouble. It is a Ponzi scheme that is about to collapse." "How much debt?" Bill asked. $400 million, Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, spread across a dozen banks hidden behind layers of subsidiaries. "The company is 6 months away from bankruptcy, maybe less." Bill's smile was cold. "Buy the debt, all of it." There was a murmur around the table. One of the younger team members spoke up. "Sir, that is $300 million. I will write the check myself." Sophie stared at her father. $300 million. A sum that would have been unimaginable to her a month ago. A sum that Bill was willing to spend without hesitation. "What does buying the debt accomplish?" she asked. "Control," Catherine explained. "When you own someone's debt, you own them. We can call in those loans at any time. We can force Caldwell and Company into bankruptcy on our schedule, not theirs." "Layer 2 is legal," Bill said. "Catherine?" The screen changed again, this time showing logos of federal agencies. SEC, FBI, IRS. "Local police are compromised," Catherine said. "Preston has been buying influence at the precinct level for years, but federal investigators are a different story. They do not take donations from local CEOs, and they do not care how much money you have donated to charity. We are filing complaints with all 3 agencies," Bill said. "Securities fraud with the SEC, wire fraud with the FBI, tax evasion with the IRS. Let them fight over who gets to prosecute him first." Sophie felt a flicker of hope. Federal charges. Real charges that could not be buried by a friendly judge or a compromised detective. "Layer 3 is reputation," Bill continued. "This is where it gets personal." The screen changed to show a collection of documents, articles, photographs, financial records. We have compiled a dossier on Preston, Catherine said. His affairs, the fabricated medical records against Sophie, the financial irregularities, all of it documented, sourced, and verified. Who are you going to leak it to? Sophie asked. Not tabloids, Bill said firmly. Tabloids can be dismissed as gossip. We are sending this to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and 60 Minutes. Legitimate journalists who will do their own investigation and verify everything independently. Let the reporters do the work, Catherine agreed. We just give them the facts. Layer 4 is social. Bill's voice hardened. Preston has spent years building his reputation as a philanthropist and a pillar of the community. We are going to tear that down piece by piece. How? Quiet calls. Bill began pacing around the table. To board members, country club committees, charity foundations. Preston's power comes from his network. We are going to make sure that network abandons him. Sophie thought about all the galas she had attended, all the donors she had charmed on Preston's behalf, the same people who had smiled at her while her husband plotted her murder. And layer 5, Catherine said, her voice dropping. Personal. The screen changed one final time. A single photograph. Maggie Vance. The mistress, Catherine said. She is the weak link. Preston is ruthless, but Maggie is practical. She got into this for money and advancement. When she realizes she is about to lose everything, she will turn on him to save herself. Bill leaned forward. I will handle Maggie personally, Dad. Sophie's voice was hesitant. Are you sure that is a good idea? If she tells Preston, she will not. Bill's smile was thin and knowing. Because I am going to offer her something she cannot refuse, the chance to spend 10 years in prison instead of 25. The meeting lasted 3 more hours. Strategies were debated. Timelines were established. Roles were assigned. By the end of it, Sophie had a complete picture of the war they were about to wage. 5 fronts. Dozens of operatives. Millions of dollars. All of it aimed at one man who had made the mistake of underestimating a gardener and his daughter. As the team filed out, Bill pulled Sophie aside. There is one more thing, he said quietly. Something only you can do. What is that? Preston's finances are complicated. Shell companies, offshore accounts, hidden transactions. My team is good, but they are not forensic accountants. Sophie understood immediately. You want me to trace the money. I want you to find the smoking gun, the one piece of evidence that proves attempted murder, not just fraud, something that cannot be explained away or deleted. Sophie thought about the burner phone, the text messages about accidents happening to new mothers, the oxygen valve. Somewhere in Preston's financial records, there had to be evidence of premeditation, a payment to someone at the hospital, a bribe to the psychiatrist who had created the fake medical records, something that tied the financial fraud to the attempted murder. I will find it, she said. Bill put his hand on her shoulder. I know you will. You are always brilliant with numbers, smarter than any of the people I pay millions to every year. I should have told you that more often. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. For so many years, she had thought her father was disappointed in her, thought that he saw her as just a gardener's daughter who had gotten lucky. Now she understood. He had always believed in her. He had just been waiting for her to believe in herself. I will not let you down, she said. You never could, Bill replied. Now get to work. We have a monster to destroy. Sophie spent the next 2 weeks buried in financial records. Bill's team had obtained mountains of documents, bank statements, wire transfers, corporate filings, tax returns, all of it obtained through legal means mostly, or at least means that would not compromise their case in court. Sophie worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and rage. She cross-referenced transactions, traced money through shell companies, and built a map of Preston's financial empire that grew more damning by the hour. The fraud was worse than anyone had suspected. Preston had been cooking the books for years, creating fake revenue, to inflate the company's stock price while secretly siphoning millions into his personal accounts. He had lied to investors, to regulators, to his own board of directors. But fraud was not murder. Sophie needed something more. She found it on a Tuesday night at 2 in the morning when her eyes were burning and her brain was fuzzy with exhaustion. A payment, $200,000, transferred from Preston's personal account to something called MedTech Solutions 2 days before Sophie went into labor. MedTech Solutions did not exist. Sophie searched every corporate registry, every business database, every financial record she could find. There was no company by that name, so she traced the routing number. The money had gone to a personal account, an account belonging to Dr. Nathan Cole, the chief of medicine at St. Michael's Hospital. Preston had paid the hospital chief $200,000 2 days before they tried to kill Sophie. That was not coincidence. That was premeditation. Sophie printed the transaction records and brought them to her father the next morning. "This is it," she said. "This is the smoking gun." Preston paid Dr. Cole $200,000 right before the murder attempt. This proves he planned it. Bill studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, that cold, thin smile that Sophie was starting to recognize. "That is my girl," he said. Within 48 hours, federal agents had arrested Dr. Nathan Cole at his home in Westchester. He was charged with bribery, accessory to attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. Dr. Cole's lawyer tried to negotiate. His client was a respected physician, a family man, a pillar of the medical community. Surely there was some arrangement that could be made. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, a former member of Bill's team, was not interested in arrangements. Dr. Cole could cooperate fully and testify against Preston Caldwell, or he could spend the next 30 years in federal prison. Dr. Cole chose to cooperate. Maggie Vance was next. Bill visited her personally, just as he had promised. He showed up at her apartment in his gardener clothes, looking every inch the simple working man she had dismissed at the hospital. "Who are you?" Maggie demanded when she opened the door. "I am Sophie's father." Maggie laughed. "The gardener? What, are you here to trim my hedges?" Bill did not smile. "I am here to tell you that you have 48 hours to cooperate with federal investigators. If you do, you might get 10 years instead of 25. Are you threatening me? I am informing you. Preston will throw you under the bus the moment he is cornered. You know that. You have always known that." Maggie's smile faltered. For the first time, Sophie's father saw doubt in her eyes. "He is going to tell them it was all your idea," Bill continued, "that you turned off that oxygen valve on your own, that he did not know what you were planning. He will let you take the fall for everything, while he walks away with a slap on the wrist." "That is not true." Maggie's voice was less confident now. "Preston loves me. He would never. Preston loves money, and power, and himself." Bill turned to leave. 48 hours, Miss Vance. After that, my offer expires. And so does your future." Maggie called the federal prosecutor 24 hours later. She was tired of being a footnote in Preston's story, she said. Tired of being the other woman, the secret, the disposable accomplice. If cooperating meant spending 10 years in prison instead of 25, then she was willing to tell them everything. Everything. Preston was arrested at a board meeting 3 days later. Sophie was not there to see it, but Bill's team recorded the whole thing through a hidden camera carried by one of the board members. Preston was in the middle of a presentation about quarterly earnings when the door opened and 6 FBI agents walked in. He kept talking for a few seconds, as if he could not quite process what was happening. Then one of the agents stepped forward. "Preston James Caldwell, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder in the first degree. You have the right to remain silent." Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Sophie watched the recording later that night in her father's office. She watched Preston's face as the handcuffs went on, watched the confusion turn to fear, then to rage, then to something that looked almost like despair. For 8 years, she had loved this man, had shared his bed, carried his child, built a life around his lies. Now she watched him being led away in handcuffs, and she felt nothing but relief. "It is over," Bill said quietly. "He is done." Sophie shook her head. "Not yet. He still has lawyers. He still has money. He could fight this for years. He could try." Bill's smile was grim. "But his money is my money now. I own his debt, remember? As of this morning, Caldwell and Company is officially bankrupt. Preston does not have a dollar to his name. And his lawyers? Public defenders. The best legal team money can buy just dropped him as a client. Something about not wanting to be associated with a man who tried to murder his pregnant wife." Sophie felt tears streaming down her face. After everything, after all the fear and the pain and the desperation, it was finally over. She was going to get her daughter back. She was going to get her life back. And Preston was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Dad." Bill put his arm around her. "You did this, Sophie. You found the evidence. You did not give up when everything seemed hopeless. I just provided the resources. You provided everything." Bill shook his head. "I provided money, you provided courage, and courage is worth more than all the money in the world." The federal holding facility was cold and gray, exactly the kind of place that Preston Caldwell had spent his entire life trying to avoid. Sophie walked through the security checkpoint with her head held high. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, but she knew it was necessary. She needed to face Preston one last time, needed to see him as he really was, stripped of his power and his charm and his lies. The guards led her to a small interview room. Preston was already there, seated at a metal table with his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked different, without his expensive suits and perfectly styled hair, smaller somehow, more human. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not been sleeping well. Good. Sophie hoped he never slept well again. She sat down across from him. The guard retreated to the corner of the room, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to give them the illusion of privacy. Preston spoke first. "Sophie." His voice was hoarse, defeated. "This has gone far enough, I agree," Sophie replied calmly. "Your father cannot keep this up forever." Preston leaned forward, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I have resources you do not know about. Offshore accounts? People who owe me favors? Had." Sophie's voice was flat. "You had resources. My father bought your debt this morning. You are bankrupt, as of 2 hours ago." Preston's face went pale. "No, that is not possible. Possible and done. Every bank that held a note on Caldwell and Company sold their position to Mercer Holdings. You do not have a dollar to your name, Preston. You do not even have the money to pay your lawyers." Preston stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For the first time since Sophie had known him, he seemed genuinely lost for words. Then his expression shifted. The charm came back, smoother and more desperate than ever. "Sophie, we can still fix this. I will confess to the fraud, serve a few years, but the attempted murder charge, that was Maggie. She acted alone. I was in shock. I did not know what she was doing." Sophie almost laughed. "That is your defense? You did not know your mistress was killing your wife while you watched?" I panicked. I froze. "That is not a crime. You checked your Rolex." Sophie's voice hardened. "While I was dying, while our daughter was dying, you checked your watch and said you had a dinner reservation. That is not panic. That is calculation." Preston's mask cracked Underneath it, Sophie saw something she had never seen before. Fear, raw, desperate fear. Please, he whispered. Sophie, I am begging you. Do not do this. Sophie leaned forward. Do you remember what I did before we got married? Before you convinced me to give up my career? Preston did not answer. I was a forensic accountant, one of the best in the city. I made my living finding the money that powerful men tried to hide. Sophie. And I found the voice memo. Preston's face went white. Your phone, Sophie continued, synced to our shared cloud. You recorded a strategy memo the morning of my delivery. Want me to play it for the jury? She pulled out her phone and pressed play. Preston's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. Memo to self. Post-delivery contingency. If Sophie survives, maintain concerned husband narrative. If she does not, contact insurance within 24 hours. Tell Maggie to keep her mouth shut about the valve. Make sure to look devastated at the funeral. The black Armani will play well on camera. Sophie stopped the recording. You planned your outfit for my funeral, Preston, while I was in labor with your daughter. Preston slumped in his chair. The last traces of his confidence drained away, leaving nothing but a scared man who had gambled everything and lost. I did love you, he said quietly. Once. Before everything got complicated. Sophie stood up. No. You loved what I gave you. Stability, respectability, a family for your Christmas card. But you never saw me. You never saw the forensic accountant. You never saw the woman who was smarter than you ever realized. She walked to the door. And that is why you lost. You underestimated the accountant. And you definitely underestimated her father. She knocked on the door. The guard opened it. We are done here, Sophie said. She walked out without looking back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The federal courthouse was packed every day, filled with reporters and curious onlookers who wanted to witness the downfall of Preston Caldwell. The media had dubbed it the trial of the year, a dramatic story of betrayal, attempted murder, and spectacular revenge. Sophie sat in the front row every day, her father beside her. She listened as the prosecution laid out their case in devastating detail. The financial fraud, the fake medical records, the insurance policy, the bribe to Dr. Cole, the text messages on the burner phone, the voice memo. One by one, the witnesses testified. Dr. Cole, pale and trembling, admitting that he had been paid to look the other way while Preston and Maggie attempted to murder Sophie. Maggie herself, stone-faced and defiant, describing in clinical detail how she had turned off the oxygen valve while Preston watched. And finally, Sophie. She took the stand on the 15th day of the trial. She told her story from the beginning. The charity gala, the divorce papers, the surveillance of Maggie's apartment, the discovery of the insurance policy, and the text messages, the horror of the delivery room, watching her husband check his watch while she suffocated. She spoke for 4 hours. She did not cry. She did not waver. She looked directly at Preston as she described the moment when she realized he wanted her dead. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for less than a day. On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Preston stood motionless as the verdicts were read. His face was blank, unreadable. Whatever emotions he was feeling, he had learned long ago to hide them. The judge cleared his throat. Preston James Caldwell, you have been found guilty on all counts. This court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 30 years. 45 years. Preston would be 87 before he was eligible for release. He would die in prison, old and alone and forgotten. Sophie watched as the guards led him away. At the door, Preston turned and looked back at her. Their eyes met one last time. Then he was gone. 3 days after Preston's sentencing, Sophie returned to the courthouse for another trial. Maggie Vance sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the polished CFO who had turned off Sophie's oxygen valve. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a plain gray suit. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her armor of confidence and ambition, she looked almost ordinary, almost human. The prosecutor was the same one who had handled Preston's case. He stood before the jury and made his argument in measured tones. Margaret Vance cooperated with this investigation. Her testimony was essential in securing the conviction of Preston Caldwell. However, her cooperation does not erase her actions. She was not a bystander. She was not a victim. She walked into that delivery room and deliberately turned off the oxygen that was keeping Sophie Caldwell and her unborn child alive. He paused, letting the words sink in. Miss Vance has accepted a plea agreement. She will plead guilty to attempted murder in the second degree in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the court must still determine what that sentence should be. The prosecution recommends 15 years, with possibility of parole after 10. Maggie's lawyer made a brief statement about her client's remorse and willingness to cooperate. Sophie barely listened. She was watching Maggie's face, trying to understand how someone could do what she had done. Had Maggie loved Preston? Had she truly believed he would leave his wife and marry her? Or had she simply seen an opportunity to advance her position and grabbed it with both hands? Sophie would probably never know. And in the end, it did not matter. Whatever Maggie's motivations had been, she had made a choice. She had chosen to help Preston murder his wife and child. Now she would pay for that choice. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. She studied Maggie for a long moment before speaking. Miss Vance, you are an intelligent woman. You had every advantage in life: education, opportunity, talent. You could have done anything with those gifts. Maggie stared straight ahead, her expression carefully blank. Instead, you chose to become an accessory to attempted murder. You chose to help a man kill his pregnant wife for insurance money. You watched as she suffocated, as her child's heart rate dropped, as she begged for help that you refused to give. The judge's voice hardened. Your cooperation does not erase that. Your remorse, if indeed you feel any, does not undo the trauma you inflicted. I accept the prosecution's recommendation, but I want you to understand something, Miss Vance. You are not a victim here. You are a perpetrator who chose to save herself when the consequences finally caught up with her. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 10. Maggie's face remained blank as the sentence was read. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply stood and allowed the guards to lead her away. As she passed through the gallery, she walked directly past Bill, who was sitting in the back row. Their eyes met. Bill nodded once. A simple acknowledgement. Message delivered. Maggie looked away and kept walking. Sophie felt her father's hand on her shoulder. It is over, he said quietly. Really over, this time. Is it? Sophie asked. I do not know if I will ever feel like it is really over. That is normal. Bill's voice was gentle. What they did to you, what they tried to take from you, that leaves scars. But scars heal. Eventually. Sophie looked at him. The gardener who was secretly a billionaire. The father who had waited 3 years for her to ask for help. Dad, she said, I am sorry. For what? For not listening to you. Before the wedding, you tried to warn me, and I did not believe you. Bill shook his head. You were in love? People in love do not listen to warnings. That is not a flaw. That is just being human. But if I had listened, then you would not have hope." Bill's eyes were warm, and that little girl is worth more than all the money in the world. Trust me on that. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. For so long, she had carried the weight of her mistakes alone. The shame of not seeing through Preston's lies. The guilt of cutting off her father when he had only been trying to protect her. Now, finally, she could let that weight go. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart." Bill pulled her into a hug. "I always have, even when you did not want me to." They stood there for a long moment, father and daughter, surrounded by the cold gray walls of the federal courthouse. Then Bill pulled back and smiled. "Come on," he said. "Let us go get your daughter." The custody hearing was brief. With Preston in prison and his resources depleted, his lawyers had no grounds to fight for custody. The fake medical records had been exposed as forgeries. The psychiatrist who had created them was facing his own criminal charges. Every piece of evidence that Preston had used to portray Sophie as unstable had been systematically dismantled. The judge reviewed the case file, asked a few questions, and made his ruling in less than 20 minutes. Full custody of Hope Mercer Caldwell was awarded to her mother, Sophie Mercer. Sophie signed the paperwork with trembling hands. Then she drove to the foster care facility where Hope had been placed during the trial. The social worker brought Hope out to the lobby. She was 9 months old now, bigger than Sophie remembered, with curious eyes that darted around the unfamiliar room. Then Hope saw her mother, and her face broke into a wide, gummy smile. Sophie scooped her daughter into her arms and held her tight. She breathed in the baby powder smell of her, felt the warm weight of her little body, listened to the happy babbling sounds she made. "I am here," Sophie whispered. "Mama is here. And I am never going to let anyone take you from me again." Hope grabbed a fistful of Sophie's hair and tugged. Sophie laughed through her tears. Everything was going to be okay. 2 years later, the house was not a penthouse. It was not even particularly large, just a modest 2-story with a white fence and a garden in the backyard, located in a quiet suburb of Connecticut. Sophie stood on the front porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. In one hand, she held a cup of coffee. In the other, she held a phone that had been buzzing with calls all morning. The Mercer Foundation was celebrating its first anniversary, and the media wanted interviews. Podcasts wanted appearances. Magazines wanted profiles. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to hear the story of the woman who had survived her husband's murder attempt and turned her pain into purpose. Sophie was not interested in being famous, but she was interested in helping other women who had found themselves trapped in relationships with dangerous men. The foundation specialized in financial advocacy for domestic abuse survivors. Sophie had discovered, during her own ordeal, how often abusers used money as a weapon. They controlled the bank accounts. They hid assets in shell companies. They used their financial power to trap their victims in marriages that were prisons in everything but name. The Mercer Foundation gave those women the tools to fight back. Forensic accountants who could trace hidden money. Lawyers who specialized in financial abuse cases. Support staff who understood that escaping a dangerous relationship was about more than just leaving. In its first year, the foundation had helped over 4,000 women. Sophie was proud of that number, but she knew there were millions more who needed help. The back door opened, and a small figure came running out onto the porch. Mama. Hope was 3 years old now, a tornado of energy and curiosity who had inherited her mother's intelligence and her grandfather's stubbornness. "Grandpa says breakfast is ready." Sophie smiled and picked up her daughter. "Coming, sweetheart." They walked inside together. The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Bill Mercer humming off key as he worked at the stove. Bill had officially retired the year before. He had stepped down as chairman of Mercer Holdings, turned the company over to a trusted board of directors, and moved into a small apartment above Sophie's garage. He said he was tired of boardrooms and balance sheets. He said he wanted to spend his remaining years doing the things that actually mattered. Mostly, that meant gardening and being a grandfather. "There you are," Bill said as Sophie and Hope entered the kitchen. "I was starting to think you had decided to skip breakfast and go straight to conquering the world." Sophie laughed. "Just answering emails. The foundation is busy today. The foundation is always busy. That is because you are too good at your job." Bill flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "You should take a break. Come help me in the garden later. Hope wants to plant tomatoes." "Tomatoes?" Hope nodded seriously. "Grandpa says the strongest things grow from the ground up." Bill winked at Sophie. She is a quick learner. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, at a small table by the window. It was nothing like the elaborate brunches Sophie used to host in the Manhattan penthouse. No catering, no designer tablecloths, just simple food shared by people who loved each other. Sophie thought about how different her life had become. 2 years ago, she had been a prisoner in a gilded cage, married to a man who wanted her dead. Now she was free. She was safe. She was surrounded by people who actually cared about her. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was better, so much better. After breakfast, Sophie went to her home office to handle the foundation's work. The room was small but efficient, with a wall of certificates and awards that she never looked at, and a desk covered in files from active cases. Her phone rang, a number she did not recognize. "Mercer Foundation," Sophie answered. "This is Sophie speaking." The voice on the other end was female, shaking, barely above a whisper. "I found hidden accounts in my husband's name. Millions. I do not know what to do." Sophie's heart clenched. She knew that voice, not the specific woman, but the fear and desperation behind it. She had felt it herself, not so long ago. "You did the right thing calling," Sophie said gently. "Take a breath. Tell me everything. We will figure this out together." She spent the next hour on the phone, taking notes, asking questions, building a picture of the woman's situation. By the time she hung up, Sophie had a plan in place. Forensic accountants would trace the hidden money. Lawyers would prepare the necessary documents. Support staff would help the woman find a safe place to stay while the legal process unfolded. Another life saved. Another woman given the chance to escape. Sophie leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. In the backyard, Bill and Hope were digging in the garden. Hope was covered in dirt, laughing as her grandfather showed her how to plant tomato seedlings. "The strongest things grow from the ground up," Sophie smiled. Her father was right, as usual. The past 2 years had taught her a lot about strength. Not the flashy kind that Preston had always valued, the power suits, and the corner offices, and the donations that bought influence. Real strength was quieter than that. It was getting up every morning after your world had been destroyed. It was rebuilding piece by piece. It was taking your pain and turning it into something that could help others. Sophie had done all of those things, and she was going to keep doing them for as long as she could. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Progress report. Preston's second appeal denied. No parole hearing scheduled. He is not getting out." Sophie read the message twice, then deleted it. She did not need to think about Preston anymore. He was a chapter of her life that was over, a wound that had finally healed. She had more important things to focus on now, like the garden, like her daughter, like the thousands of women who needed her help. Sophie stood up and walked outside to join her family. The evening light turned the garden golden as Sophie, Bill, and Hope sat down to dinner. The kitchen was cozy and warm, filled with the smells of roast chicken and fresh bread. Nothing fancy. Nothing that required a team of caterers or a designer menu. Just good food, prepared with love, shared by people who mattered. Hope had dirt under her fingernails and tomato sauce on her chin. Her dark hair was tangled from a day of playing in the garden. She was, Sophie thought, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Mama," Hope said, around a mouthful of potatoes. "Tell me a story," Sophie smiled. "What kind of story?" "The one about the princess and the dragon." Bill glanced at Sophie, his eyes twinkling. Sophie's heart swelled. "Okay," she said. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who married a dragon." Hope's eyes went wide. A real dragon. Well, he looked like a prince on the outside. Handsome and charming and everything a princess was supposed to want, but inside, he was a dragon. Cold and cruel and selfish. What happened? The princess did not know he was a dragon at first. She thought she could change him. She thought that if she loved him enough, he would become the prince she wanted him to be. Did it work? It worked. Sophie shook her head. No. Because dragons do not change. They just get better at hiding what they really are. Hope frowned. That is sad. It was, Sophie agreed. For a long time. The princess was very sad. She was trapped in the dragon's castle, and she did not know how to escape. But then what happened? Then Sophie glanced at Bill, who was watching with a small smile on his face. Then she remembered something important. She was not alone. She had a father who loved her, a father who had been waiting for her to ask for help. Did he save her? He helped her save herself, Sophie said, because that is what family does. They do not do things for you. They stand beside you while you do the hard things yourself. Hope considered this. And then what? And then the princess escaped. With her father's help, she brought the dragon to justice. She got her baby back. She built a new life, far away from the castle and the lies and the fear. Did she live happily ever after? Sophie looked out the window. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The garden was quiet and peaceful, filled with the tomatoes she and Hope and Bill had planted together. She thought about everything she had lost. Her marriage, her naivety, her trust. She thought about everything she had gained. Her daughter, her father, her purpose. She thought about the voice memo on Preston's phone. The black Armani will play well on camera. The casual cruelty of a man who had planned his wife's funeral outfit while she was in labor. Preston was in prison now, 45 years without parole. He would die behind bars, old and alone and forgotten. Maggie was serving her sentence too, 15 years. She had written Sophie a letter once, full of apologies and excuses. Sophie had burned it without reading past the first paragraph. Dr. Cole had testified against Preston in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had lost his medical license and his reputation. Last Sophie had heard, he was working as a file clerk in a government office somewhere. Justice had been served. The dragon had been slain. The princess was free. But happily ever after was not quite right. Happy endings were for fairy tales. Real life was messier than that. She lived, Sophie said finally. And that was enough. Hope thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded, satisfied. I like that story, she said. Can I have more potatoes? Sophie laughed. Of course, sweetheart. She passed the bowl to her daughter. Bill caught her eye across the table and smiled. Good story, he said quietly. It is still being written, Sophie replied. All the best ones are. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Hope fell asleep in Bill's arms, her head resting on his shoulder, her breath soft and even. Sophie looked at them, her daughter and her father, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. Bill shook his head. You do not need to thank me. This is what fathers do. Not all fathers. No, not all. Bill's eyes were sad for a moment, but I learned a long time ago that you cannot save people from their own choices. You can only be there when they are ready to ask for help. I should have asked sooner, maybe. Or maybe you needed to learn the lesson the hard way. Some people do. Bill shifted Hope's weight in his arms. The important thing is that you learned, and that you are using what you learned to help others. Sophie thought about the woman she had talked to that morning, the hidden accounts, the millions of dollars, the fear in her voice. There are so many of them, Dad. So many women trapped in marriages like mine. How do I help them all? You do not, Bill said simply. You help one at a time. And you trust that the ones you help will help others. That is how change happens. Not in grand gestures, but in small acts of courage, multiplied across time. Sophie nodded. Her father was right. As usual, I am going to make this count, she said. Everything that happened, everything I went through, I am going to make it mean something. You already have. Bill smiled. Now stop worrying about the future and enjoy the present. Your daughter is drooling on my shirt, and I think the fireflies are about to come out. Sophie laughed. She leaned back in her chair and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Hope stirred in Bill's arms, mumbling something in her sleep. Tomatoes, she murmured. Grow from the ground up, Bill chuckled. Even in her dreams, Sophie smiled. She was going to be okay. They were all going to be okay. Not because the dragons had been slain, not because justice had been served, not because the bad guys were in prison and the good guys had won. They were going to be okay because they had each other. Because they had rebuilt their family from the ashes of betrayal. Because they had learned that the strongest things grow from the ground up. The fireflies came out, just like Bill had predicted. They flickered in the darkness like tiny stars, filling the garden with magic. Sophie watched them dance and felt, for the first time and longer than she could remember, completely at peace. She was a survivor, a mother, a daughter, a founder, a woman who had stared into the darkness and refused to be destroyed. She was Sophie Mercer, and she was finally, truly free. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.